Hello, welcome to Chapter 10 of the Journey to Shalom Supplemental Edition. Thanks for hanging in there and getting through these chapters, and I hope that this is enriching your understanding and giving you some inspiration for deeper connection to yourself, to God, and to others. In Chapter 10, my story connects me to yours, is starting to get into another complex process of how our internal family is reacting to others' internal systems. And there is a whole nother book on this that I would recommend to really dive into this dynamic and this process. But Molly gives a great illustration of the story of the Good Samaritan, which Jesus gave, the original version of that, as a lesson, as an invitation, as many things, but he allowed the people to receive what they could receive at the time, and so not everyone walked away from that story with the same lessons. Nevertheless, the story is still pertinent to us today, and Molly's really highlighting here how responsive our nervous system and our psychological system is to our environment. And it's important to understand the humanity side of this, because I think my observation is what has happened is that in reading these stories in Jesus's ministry, we have actually made a burden out of helping others. We've made it a duty, an obligation, and that's, when you look at it from a humanity perspective, that's not at all how it is. It's not how it was for Jesus, as he was loving others. And he says, love others the way that I have loved you. He did not love out of fear and obligation and duty, but because we don't understand really the process of that for us, we have burdened ourselves and burdened others with, you must, you ought, if you don't, there's consequences in heaven, or there's consequences with God. Just honestly, a lot of ridiculousness and pain that has come from this understanding. And so what I want to point out in these three examples of the Good Samaritan, and she's pointing out, is that every person is going through something, regardless of what they look like on the outside. Obviously, the person in the story who had been robbed was going through something that was much more visible and tangible. But every character in the story is going through something, but not every character is going through the something in the same way, right? There's a ratio of how much protection to connection that we are living in. And that ratio changes daily and many times throughout the day. But the, quote, Good Samaritan was the one who had 51% more connection than he had protection going on, which is what allowed him to respond differently to his environment. And so I believe that that's really what this story is about from Jesus's perspective, what he really wants people to get. And he's not taking responsibility for them to get it. He's just offering it and trusting that God will sow the seeds and bring forth the harvest. But what he is getting at is that it's the mindset, it's the degree of access to the love of God that you have at any given time. That is to be a neighbor. to be a vessel of God, to be able to give out of an overflow, and even to know how to shift towards that abundance of love that God has given to us when we're in a state of protection or scarcity. That's really what our opportunity to see here is. And the humanity side of it is really valuable and honestly only relatively understanding in modern language, but the nervous system learning has helped us to understand this, that how reactive we are to our environment. And so she talks about protectors react to vulnerability. Well, there's a little bit more to it than that I wanted to highlight, is that what happens is our entire body, right, our nervous system, our psychological system, uh, our entire body responds to environmental stimuli. And then whatever that environmental stimuli is, it connects it to past experiences and the meanings that were generated from those past experiences. So our nervous system, before we're conscious at all, our nervous system is taking in the data and automatically categorizing it to something we previously experienced and concluded as such and such. That's what generates vulnerability within our own system. So depending on what the past experience was, and the meaning attached to it determines how much vulnerability we're going to experience. And when we experience that vulnerability, right, and exile, gives off a signal, then protectors organize. And the greater the vulnerability, the greater the layers of protection. So it's not vulnerability is the problem, and that's the enemy we need to solve. Really, it's the meaning that we assign to our experiences that generate this really quick assessment, and oftentimes very incorrect assessment of our circumstances, and close off our access to love, connection, clarity, courage. So we'll do an exercise around that at the end of this, because doing nervous system work has become an essential piece of self-care, in addition to recovery, right? One of my counseling colleagues even said recently, even though we weren't trained in this information years ago, it's now become available, and we realize that if we're not doing nervous system work with clients, we're not doing any work at all. Because if the nervous system is not allowing healing is not happening. So the three people in the Good Samaritan story are all having a nervous system reaction, and they are then thinking about it, right? And then deciding, and then making their behavioral choices. But their behavioral choices are the least of their humanity, and their opportunities to do different or be different come much sooner in the story than the action they take. So the big skill here, and honestly is probably one of the big takeaways from this work, is in order to love your neighbor as yourself, or as Jesus asked his disciples, love them as I have loved you. In order to do that, you have to be able to locate yourself, the capital S. You have to be able to locate and participate in the ratio of connection to protection that you are functioning in. And we do that with a skill called making a U-turn, a YOU turn. And when we make a U-turn, it's because we have this overriding understanding that my reaction right now is more about me than it is about the environment. And I'm going to make a U-turn so that I can connect with what's going on inside of me, and therefore have more choices as to how I might want to protect myself, or connect with my environment. And there really is no limitation to making U-turns. You can do them anywhere, for any amount of time. Any amount of U-turn is going to generate a little less protection and a little bit more connection. And judgment is what we're doing, whether it's others or ourselves, when we're not doing U-turn. When we're making speculations, when we're drawing conclusions, when we're predicting, avoiding, all of those patterns, there's no U-turn being done. Doesn't mean that we're going to stop and help somebody on the side of the road because we did a U-turn. But doing the U-turn is what allows us to companion our humanity, but live spiritually, make choices spiritually, connect with the Trinity, who is already at work with a plan for the person on the side of the road. And so, making the U-turn, I would even dare to say, it is the basis of a spiritual practice with the living God. And it can be done, and would be beneficial to be done, very, very frequently, even as we sit down just to read the scripture and just to notice what is our connection to protection ratio, because it's going to end up influencing how we interpret what we read. And so, same thing with prayer. If we do a U-turn at the beginning of our prayer and check our connection to protection ratio and get a little bit more a little bit more connection, we're going to end up having a different prayerful experience. So, let me invite us to a practice. She gives some good prompts on page 198 for here about connecting with the parts who are reacting to others. I like to go a little deeper with this in noticing our stories. And so we'll do one practice, but this is one that is definitely worth repeating, because there's so many stories that we carry. This practice one time, won't illuminate a whole lot, but this kind of a U-turn over time would definitely give you a fuller reality of your internal family and AKA who you are. So I'm going to pause and let you find some rhythm for shalom, however much you can. There's no benefit in expecting yourself or people to um, force into a calm state. Just be in the state that you're in, whatever that is. If it's moving around, whatever the state is, just be in it and just notice it as it is. It's going to be some proportion of protection and some of connection. And if you pause and make a commitment to not be judgmental of yourself, it will be quite clear what that ratio is. And however much your internal family wants to participate in this, I would invite them to bring to you a recent encounter with a person, a recent event. And I'm not giving any value that's got to be positive or negative, but one that's interesting enough for you to work with, one that your parts might really appreciate gaining some perspective or some more connection with. And before we reflect on this experience, check and see if there are any parts who are really opposed to reflecting on this or have real fears or concerns about digging this up at all. And if so, you have a choice to choose a different experience or ask these protectors what do they need in order to let you try something new. So if you pick something new, then ask that same question again if there are any protectors who have any concerns. And assuming that you've got some permission to reflect on an event, just ask your mind to replay that event, kind of like a movie. And your job is to not be in the movie this time, but to observe it, but also observe the impact that this experience had on your internal family. And notice the most subtle sensations from your hands, your feet, your face. And ask your mind to just replay this experience again. And this time, notice, what did this remind you of? What connections were you making when you were in this experience? And then welcome the stories, or a story, a conclusion, an assumption that was very subtly playing during that experience subconsciously. The story may, have been true, right? Or it may have been the story you were hoping to be true, or maybe it was a story that was once true. That's not what's important. What's important is what was the story. And then ask your mind to replay this experience again. And this time, notice your response after the story. So at the time, you weren't aware of the story, but your response in the situation came after the story was played inside. Just notice your reactions. And now, knowing a little bit about the story that was playing, does your reactions make sense to you? Or why you reacted that way? Now, thank your parts for letting you try this experiment, however well it worked. It might have been new for you, and they might just be building trust to be able to do it some more, but thank them and notice how you're feeling towards yourself and towards yourself that had that experience. And with your next breath, bring your attention back out to your environment, just reflecting on that experience. And is any residual effect that's in your body or any emotions that you're having? Just acknowledging them is often enough to dissipate or reduce them. And as you go forward into your next thing, may it be kind to yourself first, which will increase the likelihood that it will be kind to others. May you have the presence to notice the peace that's already in your next thing. May you have the confidence to follow the trail of clarity, and to climb to peaks of perspective, and to be patient until your parts can be playful and pleasant and enjoy the life that you have. Take care. See you for the last chapter.